It's time for Talkward, cringeworthy tales. And now, your host, weekly humorist, editor-in-chief, Marty Dundix.
Hi, and welcome to Talkward. I'm Marty Dundix, editor-in-chief of Weekly Humorist magazine, and this is Talkward, a fun little podcast where professionally funny people come to tell awkward and cringeworthy stories. I'm very excited about this episode's guest. She is a very funny author, author of the newest book we have coming out for humorous books, Which Demands Your Attraction, Figures for Adults, written by her and illustrated by Ron Barrett. Please welcome Melissa Balmain. Melissa, how are you?
I am great, thank you. I am so happy to be here and not outside freezing my butt off. So, yes, thank you very much.
Beaming in from Rochester, the upstate New York lake effect snow capital of New York. We were talking a little bit earlier. I went to Syracuse and well aware of the freezing cold temperatures that you have to put up with out in Rochester. And The Which Demands Your Attraction is a hilarious book of short poetry. I have a better bio for you that is amazing, and I had too many buttons to push. Melissa edits Light, America's longest running journal of light verse. Her humor has appeared in The American Bystander, Lighten Up Online, McSweeney's, The New Yorker, The New York Times, Success, The Washington Post, and Weekly Humorist. Her full-length poetry collection, Walking In on People, winner of the Able Muse Book Award, has been praised by Poet Laureate Billy Collins as an infectious, often hilarious blend of the sweet and the lethal, the charming and the acidic. Pretty amazing quote there from Poet Laureate Billy Collins. Now, how did he happen upon your book? Did he just see it and then did you reach out to him?
A mutual acquaintance reached out to him, and I hadn't even thought of this story when I was thinking about cringeworthy tales from my past, but actually the story of getting that blurb is so cringeworthy. So I knew. Oh,
yes. Let's know about it, because people may not know all the book world. When you have a book coming out, you got to get blurbs, right? On the back of the book or on the front of the book, you see all these quotes from all these big names, and they are praising the book and they're saying how great it is. And you might think to yourself, how do people just line up and give you wonderful blurbs for your book when you're say, I finished this book. Please back the blurb truck up and I'll pick out the best blurbs to put on the back of my book. But that's not exactly how it happens. How does it happen that you get these blurbs?
Well, this one, as I said, the mutual acquaintance had thought that my stuff would be up Billy Collins' alley. And of course, that would be so fantastic for me because he's like the best known funny poet in America. I didn't have high hopes for it. I didn't hear from him for months. I was like, well, I guess he hated it. And then I get an email from the mutual acquaintance saying, so pretty great about Billy's blurb, huh? And I'm like, what blurb? And he said, he sent you this glowing blurb like weeks and weeks ago. Well, I had never seen it. And here's our mail system in my house. Somebody gets our mail and they throw it on a bench in our front hall. And then the next day they throw more mail on the bench in our front hall, and so on and so on. And I started to think, oh my God, it's behind the bench. And I went into the hall and I moved the bench, and literally the only thing behind the bench was an envelope from Billy Collins with a blurb in it. And I would never have known.
It's amazing. And you've been nominated for a Pulitzer?
Yeah, for all I know, he's won a Pulitzer. That's embarrassing not to know. But yes, he's huge.
Oh, I thought you were nominated for a Pulitzer.
Oh, yeah. No, I've been nominated for. So let me tell you about Pulitzer Prizes. So saying you're nominated for a Pulitzer Prize means that a publication you wrote for nominated you, or your publisher nominated you. It doesn't mean like the world of arts and letters voted and said, you are the best.
But I mean, someone nominating you is very flattering.
Yes, no, it was very flattering. And it gives your heart this little lift, like, maybe in the great lottery of fame, but no. But yes, it's very nice. It's very, very nice.
And you have been.
If anyone wants to nominate me for another one, I am fine with that.
And if anybody wants to nominate me for a Pulitzer, please do. I'm sure that hopefully the process is easy. Maybe it's a Google form. I bet it's been streamlined.
I will nominate you.
Okay, you nominate me, I'll nominate you.
Perfect.
And perfect. You've been doing poetry for your whole career. When did you start writing poetry? How did you get into being a poet? It sounds like such a thing that has been around forever. You know what I mean? Like, I love jobs that you could have had this job in the dark ages. You know what I mean? Like, you could have had this job in the 100s. I
Well, if
like,
I had this, if I'd had this job back then, I would have been in greater danger, because like
yes,
you would have had, maybe not that long ago, but you know how centuries ago poets would have patrons
yes,
who would let them live fancy, semi-fancy little lives while they wrote poems about,
living the dream.
defense,
If
living the
only.
dream, but you had to watch what you said. You had to say nice things about your
Yeah.
patron, or you could end up dead. So, these days you get little or no money for poetry, but you're less likely to end up dead. And I think that's probably a good trade-off. But
I
you
don't
need
know.
another day job. You
I
need a day
think,
job.
being a court jester could have been a good gig for a while until you
Oh,
pissed
I
off
would
the
have been
wrong
such a
person.
good court jester. I would have loved that job. Just like I fall down all the time anyway. I could have, bumping into things, saying embarrassing stuff unintentionally. I would have been really good at that. But yeah, I fell into poetry pretty early in one sense, which is I started writing little poems and parodies as a kid.
Okay.
And I would occasionally write things. I recently resurrected in my mind during a car trip the first piece of comic poetry I remember writing that was not a parody, which was like in 8th grade, which had to do, I remember I was very proud of myself for, it was an assignment for English class, and you had to discuss something we were reading, and one of the choices was in a poem, and I was super proud because I rhymed imagine-it with Plantagenet, and that was the best thing I had ever done. But then I didn't really write a lot of poetry, not even in college, and then I was working on my first book, which is a book of nonfiction about travels I took with my mother.
Okay.
And two good friends of mine had this sort of light verse club going on email where they were writing in this form called the double dactyl. I will get into that if you want me to, but you probably don't want me to explain what a double dactyl is.
Sure. I find this all very fascinating. And also the niche of poetry, which is light verse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, light verse is a very specific thing. What qualifies as light verse in the poetry world?
Well, it's kind of a squishy term. It means different things to different people. To some people, it means limericks. Like that's it.
Okay.
A limerick, but that's not really, to me, it's a much bigger tent. And to me, it's just seeing things with a sense of humor or wit. To me,
is that like stanzas? Is that like Shakespearean short humor?
It could be formal poetry, as in the kind that rhymes and scans, or it could be free verse, which doesn't necessarily have rhymes or a clear meter to it. But the unifying theme is finding humor in life. So I forget where this all started when you were asking me about this.
When this started, though, so light verse, finding humor in life, that is almost like the earliest. I studied a little bit. I did Shakespeare in college. I studied poetry in college, and it seems like some of the earliest stuff, like some of the earliest, like even pre-Shakespeare stuff, there's always this sort of attitude of, it always has kind of a twist at the end. And I feel like even like Dark Ages humor, it was always about the comeuppance, right? It was always like anti-rich person, pro-poor person, because it's usually the downtrodden. They were the ones who were writing all this. So they always were kind of like trying to kind of stick it to the man. And so a lot of the stuff was sort of, even when it was really dark humor and some of the Grimm's fairy tales got really dark, but it was always kind of like that funny twist, or that tragic twist at the end was always sort of like, ha. And when you studied, did you study poetry in school? And when what early poetry did you like that kind of made you want to do funny light verse?
So before I started writing a whole lot of poetry myself, I fell in love with writers like Dorothy Parker and Phyllis McGinley, Richard Armour. These were people who were household names a couple generations ago. funny poetry, or poetry that tried to be funny at least, was a fixture in all the mainstream magazines and newspapers. And partly because in those days, before everything was computerized and formatted so neatly by machines, people were doing it, and there would be these awkward little spaces at the bottom of a column of type. Like, what are you going to plug that with? A poem. And so that was part of why these poems were everywhere. And the other part, I think, was that people on both sides of the Atlantic were reading a lot of poetry as students then. I think that's more prevalent now in England than it is in the US. People still read poetry here, but I don't think it's emphasized as much. And so, poems that in part are deriving humor from being in contrast to the traditional poems that you're reading in school, like that's not so funny anymore if you're not reading those traditional poems in school anymore. So anyway, but back in those days, it was very prevalent, and it is kind of on an upswing recently. I can talk about that if you want to, but and anyway,
is it becoming much more of a prevalent? Are you seeing, because you're the editor of Light, is it Lighten Up Online or Lightverse?
Well, that is a really wonderful journal of comic verse run out of the UK, and that's kind of the friendly competition of the journal that I edit, which is just called Light. Okay. Although if you look it up online, it's lightpoetrymagazine.com.
And that's the longest running?
It is. It's been around since 1992. It used to be a print journal only. And when I became the editor, in 2012, and we put out our first online edition in 2013, which makes it more affordable. It's easy for me and my contributing and managing editor to communicate, right? We live in all different states. And of course, it's a lot cheaper. Oh,
yeah. And if people want to buy a collection, I'm sure they can.
Well, we're working on our first best of Light book. And that's a huge project. The biggest issue with any collection, as you probably know, is getting permissions to include stuff. And we already have permission for a lot of it. Anything that's run online, we have permission for, but some of the old stuff from print.
Some of the old stuff, you gotta worry about that. Yeah. Just tell them it's not going to be included. Just be like, hey, we're only going to take the online stuff. Sorry. And then they're saying, wait, please include me. And you're like, okay, I guess.
Yeah, no, I want some of the early, like we had some early, John Updike was in there. There's been some really great stuff in the print only era. Yeah. Can't really ask John Updike about it anymore, but hopefully his estate will be enough. Yeah. So, yeah.
So who are some of your favorite poets that influence your style?
So early on as a kid, I fell in love, as I said, with Dorothy Parker, Phyllis McGinley and company. I also, I loved Roald Dahl. He has light verse in his books, as you know, like
definitely
Peach, that kind of thing. And, Lewis Carroll. And so, a lot of the poetry that I really enjoyed most as a kid was funny stuff. I did study poetry in college. Like I studied, 17th century poetry and that kind of thing. Not so much the comic stuff. And I didn't really see poetry as a possible avenue for me because I didn't know that there were publications still running it. And then after I had moved from California to the East Coast, I happened into a bookshop in Boston and saw a copy of Light, the journal that I eventually came to edit. I was like, oh my God, this is a thing. I could publish, and I had sort of started writing these double dactyls, which is this sort of esoteric form with these friends of mine as a way of procrastinating. Yeah. Working on my first book, which was this nonfiction travel book. And I got hooked. I wrote more of those poems in that format, and then I just kept writing and writing and writing more of them. I was like, oh, maybe I really want to do more of that. And at the time I was still doing a lot of journalism. I still have a foot in the journalism world. But increasingly over the years, I've gravitated more and more toward, the comic verse kind of thing, or also short, humorous fiction,
Mhm.
right? And my journalism also has trended toward the comic. I've done columns for a variety of newspapers and magazines, and
I
I
was
tend
reading something. Do I still have it open? I was reading something I was reading a poem from Walking In on People. So you had a book called Walking In on People. Was it? And that was your first book? Oh, there it is. Look at that.
That
It's
was
got
my
some
first poetry book, yeah. And I love this kid on the cover. He's like, and there's a knee and fishnet at the bottom, if you can see that, yeah. Anyway,
is that from real life? Did you walk in on your parents or something, and that's something that happened?
No, I actually have a whole poem about this if you want. It's the title poem from that book. But yeah, it's about my knack for walking in, not intentionally, I promise, walking in on people while they're doing the deed. And
so you've actually walked in on people before?
Oh yeah.
I walked in on my parents one time. It only took one time, and then I never opened their bedroom door. I never touched their bedroom door ever again. And
well,
it was a very traumatic experience. I didn't really see anything. I just saw, it was darkness, and I just saw action. I saw like shock and action and sheets moving, and I'd opened the door. I saw action. I slammed the door. I ran into my room. I went under the covers, and we never spoke of it. We never talked about it. I never touched the doorknob again, and that's fine. And that's
but now
just
they know, Marty. Now you've mentioned it.
They won't listen to this. They won't see this. God, I was like, I had to have been like 6. It was like I was young, so I like touched the door, ran, done, and I never touched it. And I never touched it again.
That's
the poem that I saw here from your book was called Villain?
Oh, Villain L.
Yes.
Villain L. Yeah.
Villain L. Whenever I wake up and don't feel well, I like to read a woman's magazine. I know that I can count on Vogue or Elle. Cosmo or Glamour, Self or Mademoiselle. Instead of pills, elixirs, or caffeine, whenever I wake up, I don't feel well. Page 8 has bathing suits that look just swell. If you're 6 foot and live on lean cuisine, I know that I can count on Vogue or Elle. Page 9 is a list of wardrobe musts that sell at reasonable prices for a queen whenever I wake up and don't feel well. Page 10 says how to age yet stay a belle. The photo, it's a model of 18. I know that I can count on Vogue or Elle. To make my time in bed such living hell, I'm out of there in 60 seconds clean. Whenever I wake up and don't feel well, I know that I can count on Vogue or Elle. I think that's just a delightful little story. And
thank you.
And is that an example of the pattern?
That's a pattern. That's a traditional French form called the villanelle.
Okay.
Or not just French, but actually, I know a poet who knows the history of the villanelle intimately. But it's one of these intricate repeating forms, and typically is not used for comic poetry. But I saw it as a good venue for this particular topic. Where something is continually happening. There's a lot of different kind of existing formats that people use for comic poetry. There's the villanelle. You can use any existing format, sonnet, sestina. There are some that were kind of created specifically with humor in mind, like the limerick, like the double dactyl, epigrams, little short cutting couplets or quatrains, which date all the way back to like ancient Rome. There's a lot of existing formats, and then there's what are known as nunce forms, where you kind of create a form that suits your material or modify an existing one. Like I recently published a poem based on my experience of looking at an MRI scan of my brain. That is a shocking experience, I got to tell you.
Did you hope? Were you disappointed at it, or did you think it would be better, or were you disappointed in the sizes of different parts of your brain? You're like, that looks smaller than I hoped.
It was, well, it's just, let's just say it is way more bizarre looking than I could ever have imagined. And I was struggling to come up with a format that would suit this this material, this subject. And I ended up I think I might have created a new kind of sonnet. I'm calling it the overstuffed sonnet, where like I couldn't fit it all into a sonnet. And so I've got like a few extra little parts of lines like exploding out, which, felt to me like it really fit that. So, you kind of start writing these things and you don't necessarily know, at least I don't, as I start writing, will this be a sonnet? Will it be a limerick? Will it be something else? Those sort of galloping rhythms, are popular with people who write comic poetry because, it kind of carries you along. It's kind of fun and bouncy, even when the content is really dark. So we were talking earlier about like, what is light verse,
Yeah.
And one of the misconceptions that a lot of people I think have who maybe don't read a lot of it is that, oh, it's about happy stuff. It's only about like fluffy little, bunnies and happy elves and things like that. But it's actually a lot of my favorite comic poems by other people, and the kind I mostly like to write myself, are about darker subjects, but trying to find humor in them. And so, you just never know.
Traditionally, that's kind of how humor has always been, right? So humor comes from people sometimes are trying to find, trying to twist that sad thing into a happy thing, and they kind of, gallows humor and dark humor. I feel like that's where humor is kind of like the most needed. Usually, totally. An absolute, the saddest points in people are always like, and that's why I always watch a drama on TV. And when you watch a drama on TV that's just like drama, you're like, this isn't like real life, because real life is funnier, because people always are shoehorning humor in because it's like a reflex for people. People need a release, and people will make a joke, even if it's a terrible joke. People make a joke just to like break that tension. Like automatically. So like a dramedy is more realistic than a drama in a drama world, because, and I think maybe like a Veep or a comedy is much more realistic to real life, just because people aren't that serious. They're always injecting little humor, and like, with poems having a little twist. And also I had a question about poetry. What's the difference or the similarity between poetry and, you think, song lyrics? Are they kind of the same?
Well, there's a lot of overlap, right? And of course, the earliest poems were sung. That was a big thing. And I think a lot of the best poems today have a lot of musicality to them. And I mean, look at Bob Dylan. He won, the Nobel Prize for literature, for his lyrics. And there's a lot of overlap, and I think there's huge overlap between, comic song and comic poetry. So, for the period, there were a few decades in there where there wasn't as much comic poetry out there in magazines and newspapers and books, but we continue to have so much of it in song. Like we had Tom Lehrer through the 1960s. Do you know his songs
with the pianos and stuff?
How's that?
He was a piano guy, and he would always do kind of smart politics stuff.
Yeah. So he did songs like National Brotherhood Week and the Vatican Rag, and he was songs about nuclear war and so on. And then of course, and there are others doing that kind of thing, not as well as he did though. He's so good.
Yeah.
And then Paradis, Weird Al, and so forth. And then of course there's musical theater with so much clever writing in the lyrics. I mean, look at like Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things kept bubbling along.
And I went and saw. I had seen it right when it opened, and then I saw it again maybe 10 years later. And Wicked has a lot of humor and social commentary in its songs that stands up. Like, it's really interesting how it doesn't really matter what generation you're seeing it in. Like, I was maybe seeing it in the early 2000s, maybe during like Bush time, and then I saw it in Trump time, and like the jokes still worked. It was like that same sort of a a vein or feeling of what was going on in the government at the time was totally playing along with what was going on in the world of Wicked, and what they were trying to make jokes about when they wrote it for early 2000s holds up. So
yeah, it's fun when that happens because, sometimes, as you know, humor does not have a long shelf life.
Yeah.
But then sometimes it'll cycle back, and something that seems super topical and of its time will be relevant again, which is lovely.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of humor is, very specific to a time and place. It's, the relationshipy stuff, the family dynamic stuff, aging, death, those kinds of comic, that kind of comic material, might have a longer shelf life. But politics and
yeah, definitely. And there's always poems about aging and poems about family and love. Obviously, number one topic probably for poetry is love or sadness or heartache. Same with songs. I love the poem that's actually after this one in the Walking In on People is about the hairy woman, which is very funny.
Oh, thank you. That was so lucky for me. I was living, where was I living at the time? In Virginia. And my mom was in New York, and she happened to read the personal ads in, I think it was New York Magazine. And she's like, oh my God, you won't believe this one. And I made her save it for me because it sounded like something that I would want to do a poem on. It was this guy advertising that he wanted a hairy woman. Yeah. And I had to write a poem. How would someone respond to that ad?
Extensive. It says extensive body hair.
Extensive body hair.
It wasn't just like I want someone natural. It was I want extensive.
Oh yeah. We were talking like wolf girl.
Yeah.
That's what I was picturing. Yeah.
So coming up to The Witch Demands Your Attraction book, which was it's a wonderful book, and I have my copy right here, and it's fantastic. It's got beautiful illustrations.
I have the best publisher.
Everyone should go out and buy it immediately. Oh, your publisher was just happy to have the kind of quality work, and it's beautifully illustrated by Ron Barrett, who did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and it's just like each poem is just beautiful. And I'll put it up on the screen for those lucky enough to be watching at home. Here's the Peeved Piper.
I love that spread so much.
And you have the original.
If anybody's looking at this, I know you gotta zoom in and look at the tiny rats. It's just so great.
Well, if anyone's watching live, there is a live chat, so people can ask questions. If you have any questions for Melissa, you can ask questions about poetry or about her book or about anything, because we did push this out live, but we didn't announce it, so no one knew it was happening. But then we just it was like a guerrilla live event, and people they can happen upon it, and they can just learn if they want to ask questions to Melissa. You can just ask her questions at. Do you have a website that posts all of your? Is it just your name? What is your website?
MelissaBalmain.com. Yeah.
MelissaBalmain.com. Read all the poems. And are you putting a lot of stuff in the? Are you an American Bystander a lot?
I am. Yeah. Yeah.
Now this book started because this was an American Bystander, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mike Gerber ran a couple of my fairy tale poems in there, and it had occurred to me that I wanted to do a whole book of these, and I started cranking them out, and I got in touch with Mike, and I said, do you know any illustrators who might be interested in illustrating this? And he mentioned Ron Barrett, and of course I knew Ron's book. He's like a god in the world of illustration and comics, and check out Politeness Man, everybody, if you never did. It's just brilliant stuff. Anyway, so I wrote to Ron, as with Billy Collins, not holding out much hope that, this genius would want to work with me. But he was really enthusiastic. And so, it's been a delightful partnership. And of course, huge shout out to Mike Gerber for putting this team together. It's been amazing.
And the illustrations and he was so fast, like, for the process of actually putting this book together, you guys sent this book to Andy Newton and I at Humorous Books, and within like a couple of weeks he had sketches done, and then Ron kind of like finished the entire book like so quickly, and it's just amazing to see. I mean, the detail in this is amazing, and his quality of work is just so fun. So if people can check out, people should definitely buy this book. It's a great gift. It's really funny. It's got great fairy tale, rehashes that are much more adult and funny, and it's the true stories behind the fairy tales.
Exactly.
So, and they're great. And I mean, one of my favorites is the Snow White. I think Snow White is so funny and dirty. Melissa, you're so like not a dirty comedy seeming person. And
I like to have this facade. Yeah.
The stuff you write can be so like dirty and funny. You're just kind of like, wow, that dirty comedy mind.
I like to catch people unawares. I tend to, when editors of mine meet me, they tend to be disappointed. They're like, I thought you'd be weirder looking, but I have to get along in the real world. I have to be my kid's mom and like pick.
It's like a secret identity. I think for a lot of times, like being a comedy writer is like a secret identity for people who are just like living their normal lives. But then over here, they're writing about like all kinds of interesting, crazy, funny things and being published and all, being in McSweeney's or being Weekly Humorist or being in the New Yorker. And they get to kind of have this like this little bit of like this hilarious thing that they can do. And then the rest of the time they can be normal people. I
mean, if you come spend time with me and my family, you can decide what's normal and not. But I aspire to normalcy. Sometimes I achieve it, but it's great to have these outlets to put your crazy in.
Yes, it's important to have an outlet. Otherwise, people just explode.
Really. And in the pandemic, it's been so important.
Have you gotten a lot more writing done because of being locked down more?
I think, so things have gone back to quote normal, although probably going to pull back again now that the numbers in my county are going through the roof. But during the first year of the pandemic, I think I did get a bit more writing done, mainly because I was spending less time ferrying people about in my car. All that time came back to me and went into pandemic themed poems and humor pieces for the likes of Weekly Humorist and so many outlets. Little Old Lady Comedy, shout out to you, McSweeney's. So I found a lot of time to work on stuff. But I mean, I've always, one good thing about working in these short formats that I do is, you can squeeze them in between day job stuff. I'm a teacher and, like I said, foot in journalism. I feel like, writing short form humor is kind of like the writerly equivalent of quilting or something, where you're like making little squares for your quilt and stitching them together,
Yeah, because it's less of a commitment to say of an idea. Like I think when you're writing a book, like if someone's like writing a novel, that's like a lot, and that's going to take a long time, and maybe it's going to take forever to to come up with these characters and have a really good story. But if you're just like if you're saying I just want to write this short thing, and it's only going to be this long. And maybe that can turn into a book. Maybe that can turn into a bigger project. But it only has to live in this small world, like whether it's on a McSweeney's or whatever, whether it's the New Yorker, like it's like this little thing that gets to live and be delightful. It doesn't have to be a big project. It can be a little project that everyone sees.
Exactly.
I feel like that's almost better, like more people are going to read that short thing than they are that long thing.
Well, and it's easier to get yourself into the chair to work, because it's like, I'm going to commit. Like this morning I sat down and I was like, I'm going to work on this poem that I've been noodling with on and off, this particular poem that's been like living in the back of my mind. I'm going to bring that forward again. And I'm just going to commit to half an hour with this poem today. And then at the end of the half hour, it's like, can I commit to longer? I'm not really formally doing that, but you know what I mean? It's easier than saying, oh, and now I have to revise chapters 1 through 9,
I feel like when you get to a point, like you need to have a balance where you're not dreading doing the work. Like I feel like I have a kind of a balance where I'll set up a lot of things that I have to do, and then I start like hating them, even though they're not that much. But I'll think about it, and I'm like, even the fact that I'm thinking about it, I'm already dreading doing it, and I know I have to do it on Sunday. And then I'm like, how do I make it so I don't hate doing this? How can I motivate myself to not hate this project? And then I figure out a way to think about it a different way. And then it doesn't seem like work at all. Yeah. And then you get it done in a half an hour. Like sometimes you can dread something a lot longer than it takes to do something.
That is so true. It's so true. Getting yourself into the chair is like 3/4 of the battle. I was lucky enough in college to study with the writer John McPhee. I don't know if you know his work at all. He's a brilliant nonfiction writer. He's won the Pulitzer Prize. And
a Pulitzer.
Like a brilliant, brilliant man.
Many people probably nominated him for that.
Well, not only nominated, but chose him to win it. And so I got to study with him, and it was so comforting to learn that the great John McPhee also had trouble buckling down to write. And he tells this story, I think, to successive crops of students of like languishing on top of a picnic table, staring at the sky, despairing of being able to write something. And then he told us his trick for getting himself to actually work, which was to tie himself to his chair with his bathrobe tie. And I thought, well, if it takes light bondage to get John McPhee to write, there is great hope for me, a lesser mortal. It's so comforting to hear your heroes admit to their weaknesses and, very empowering.
Yeah, so, it seems like no matter what we're doing, there's always something that we'd rather be doing that's not that thing. Even though this is the thing that we love to do.
Yes.
But I have that other thing that's kind of like, I have like an itch in the back of my head about doing this other thing. There's always something that's always going to be. So I'm always trying to find like the optimal, like whether it's the optimal workspace, like what's the perfect desk setup, what's the perfect everything, so that I want to be at the desk and I want to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a system for writing time or creative time? Like what's your optimum writing time? Do you have a process for, sitting down?
So this was a tip I got. For several years, I was a columnist for the magazine Success. And I was sort of their, like, for lack of a better term, I was like their comic lifestyle columnist, I guess. And so mainly what I did was notice problems in my own life, find experts to interview about those problems, and then write that up. And so one of my problems was getting enough writing done that wasn't part of my day job, the paid stuff. I mean, I get paid for poetry from time to time, enough to buy a few pizzas, a month. And so it's you need motivation to be doing the quote extra work. And week after week, I would not get enough done. And I interviewed this time management person who said, put it on your calendar. And I was like, oh, really? Will that matter? But I did it. And sure enough, when I wrote on, days of the week, like this is poetry time, I started doing it. I think it depends on whether you're the kind of person who is motivated by, not wanting to let yourself down versus letting other people down. There are I interviewed the writer, Gretchen Rubin years ago for a magazine called Live Happy. And she's written a book about people and habits, and there are different sort of profiles.
A lot of these magazines have very hard to deliver titles where it's like Success Magazine, Live Happy Magazine.
I know, and it so makes you want to start a rival magazine that's like Failure Magazine.
Yeah. Or
Live
like
Miserable Magazine.
Or like Just Doing Okay, Pretty Okay Magazine, Average Living. I think Average Living. I would definitely write a column for Average Living magazine. Be like, I'm doing fine.
I totally could too.
Doing fine magazine.
Sometimes to say like, I'm a columnist for Success magazine, like as if I'm saying I am a success. It's like, no, I'm aspiring to.
Yeah.
I know. And Live Happy was a hard to deliver title, but they did have some good articles in there, and it was cool meeting this woman who had so many people in my life pegged. Like I realized like everyone in my family fit one of these habit profiles. Like, are you motivated by honoring your commitments to other people, to yourself? Or are you one of these people who has to be talked freshly into working out every day? Like it has to be, you suddenly got this whim to do it and you're going to do it.
I feel like because as you get older, you realize those things about yourself. So then you try to manipulate them, because you try to trick yourself into doing stuff. And what I've noticed is I will do stuff if it's a commitment I made to somebody else, and I can't let them down, then I'll do it, which means I'll do stuff that I promised other people before I do the stuff that I need to do for me. So the me stuff is at the bottom of the pile, and the other people's stuff always goes to the top, even if it's like, it's not a financial thing. It's just like a commitment that I made. So someone told me, I told someone I'd do something or whatever, I was doing it as a favor. That stuff is at the top of the pile just because it weighs on me more than the stuff that's personal. So it's almost like if I want to get something done that's a personal thing, I almost want to bribe a friend to tell me I have to do it for them.
Yeah, you gotta another, lifestyle expert I interviewed once called that bundling, where you put like your needs in with someone else's needs so that you'll do them.
That's smart.
And, that's where writers groups come about, right?
Accountability groups. Bundling. I'm writing that down. I used the bundling. That's how I got stuck with a phone line with my cable. I bundled.
That's idea. The bad side of bundling. That's the
bad bundle. That's the bundle that's useless.
Yeah, you know what that.
Anyway, so tell me a fun story. I want to hear your Talkward story. I feel like it's going to be walking in on somebody. So I kind of feel I want to hear about how.
Well, maybe for the walking in, I could just read you the poem if you want, because that kind of sums it up. It's the title poem of that book. Although I feel like I should probably, since you're the publisher of which, I should be reading something from that too. But let me find. Where's the table of contents? Can you play some awkward music?
Yeah. I'm gonna read out of the favorite one I had, in which is the Snow White, and you realize that she's been banging all the dwarves.
Oh no! Don't give away the punchline.
Not so Snow White. Things started out so well. Found a chick in a box, got her out, and days later we wed. Such a snap, because speaking of life's pleasant shocks, my stepmom-in-law turned up dead. Home that night after finally fooling around. Happy endings for both, I sighed. Heaven. But my wife simply stared at the ceiling and frowned. Is that it? I'm accustomed to 7. So, she's usually getting a lot more action than that. And this is a great illustration.
I love the faces on those dwarves.
Of all of the, this is at the wedding, and the husband's not looking happy. He sees what's been going on, and they're all winking and happy and excited.
That was nicely read. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you. It's a great piece. Were there any fairy tales that didn't make it in this book?
Yeah, I mean, a few. I mean, for the main thing that didn't make it into this book, of course, is the huge number of, for want of a better term, fairy tales that come from other cultures that people in our culture aren't that familiar with. So there's a huge array of them that I could have explored. But the problem with that, of course, with telling like the real story behind those, is no one knows the original story in America. But yeah, there's a lot of that. And then there were a few sort of Western European canon ones that either seem too similar to ones that are in the book, or just didn't seem as ripe for humor. Like I'm thinking, I don't know, Snow White and Rose Red, that's one. But I really, tried to do a version of almost all the ones that people know best.
I think you got most of them.
Fun. Yeah, that was fun to think about. What is the real story behind this one, or what if we heard this story from this perspective? That was fun to think about.
The one about the therapist, I love Pinocchio Runs for Office, is probably my favorite.
Oh, thank you.
And this was a great illustration.
Yeah, I love that.
It's a great one. Pinocchio Runs for Office. Folks, don't be fooled by all the phony buzz. I'm no one's puppet, and I never was. I didn't torture an endangered whale at Pleasure Island. I did not inhale. You say you've seen the footage? It's all wonky. I'm solid GOP. No hint of donkey. My only kind of circus, media. Ignore those pics on Wikipedia. And what about the rumor? So damn nasty. That constant lying led to rhinoplasty at some chic clinic north of Bimini. A smear of my opponent, Jiminy. And I love it and then the illustration of him with his nose job. It's great at the bottom. Just so many little details that Ron does to add to your jokes. Like he tosses in little visual jokes all throughout this book, and they're just so funny. Like with the toad, like licking the toad, and Puss in Boots, and there's so many just clever fairy tales. This is a great gift. Great gift for anybody for the holidays, folks. You can get this on Amazon in 2 days. And also bookshop.org. You can buy it on bookshop.org if you're not on the Amazon train. You can support independent bookstores.
If you get in touch with me on Twitter or other social media and give me your address, I'll send you a book plate.
A book plate, which is when they
signed book plate, like it's a sticker.
You can put a sticker inside your book and it's personalized to you.
Yep, the name of the person you wanted it given to, and then I might even draw like a cute picture of a broom. And anyway, I will do that. I've sent many of these out in the mail.
I saw this got a very good feature in the Washington Post. And I'm going to show the picture of the book again for those listening and watching at home. Great cover with the witch and the wicked, and then the pet peeve. And then this was in the Washington Post in March for they do a thing. Tell us about the thing that they do. They do a contest. Is it every week?
Every week there's a humor contest in the Washington Post called the Style Invitational. And so 1 week, I guess it was March or this spring, they decided to feature my book and run a contest based on it. So people sent in either short new versions of fairy tales and prose or little poems they had written based on fairy tales, and the winner or depending on how you look at it, the loser received a copy of my book and that I signed for them. So that was really nice publicity, and the woman who runs that contest said lovely things about it, and she's a person I greatly respect. So that was very nice.
Got some great spread in the newspaper, full color. You could see the cover of the book, and then they had their own illustration that they did, like a fairy tale jokey illustration that looked good.
That was great. That was by the artist Bob Stack, whose work you probably know. He does all the illustrations for the Style Invitational. Yeah. And that's, by the way, one of that contest, along with journals like the one that I run, the one that I mentioned in Britain, has helped get some more people into writing comic poetry in recent years. Because, if you build it, they'll come. And now that there are places that will publish it, why not write some more of it,
Absolutely.
A lot of writers, like, the reason that they're writing more comic poetry is because I've provided a place to run it,
Yeah. People love, and people love reading stuff. People love submitting to stuff, and people love learning how to write in this way. And if there's online courses, have really opened up people's eyes to writing in general, or anything in general. Like when you get a little older, you realize that you wish you had studied things more, maybe when you were in college, that you didn't even think that you were interested in. And then you get a little older and you're like, okay, I've done that, but maybe I wanted to focus on this. Maybe this wasn't offered in college or whenever. And then you can there's so many good online courses now.
Oh yeah.
Whether it's, comedy focused writing or comedy, there's comedy stuff, but skit writing and joke writing and stand-up comedy stuff. But then like writing a book, writing a novel, writing a mystery, writing poetry. Like there's so many things you can do online now, whether it's Pandemic University was a big thing that opened up during the pandemic, or just like like Catapult has a bunch of courses. But there's tons of like online courses now. Do you teach any online courses?
Not counting having to Zoom teach during the pandemic at the university where I work.
So you're a college professor.
Yeah, not a professor, but like I'm adjunct, meaning that I do that as one of my gigs. I'm not one of these full-time, have to belong to committees and make the big bucks professors. I am part-time, and I teach a few classes a year. I do a little bit of advising. I do office hours, but that leaves me time for editing and writing my own stuff and throwing food at my family.
Have you taught any poetry classes on your own?
I've taught poetry at University of Rochester, where I work. I've also taught a number of poetry classes at workshops. They're generally called at various conferences around the country, and the last couple of years, those haven't been happening so much. Obviously, some things have moved online. I would be open to teaching. I've done a lot of workshops on, writing comic poetry. And
what's an
that would be
advice?
online.
How do you tell someone how to be funny? Like, what's your advice when you're trying to teach comedy? Like, what is the number one thing you have to tell someone? Like, what makes that funny thing? Or does someone have to be kind of funny already?
I don't think you can make somebody funny. Like, you can't give them like funny genes. You have to kind of be born with a bent towards it. But I find that people who take these workshops and classes are self-selecting. They tend to have some humorous spark. But the one thing that, and I'm hardly the first person to say this, Jerry Seinfeld put it very well when he said, I think it was Jerry Seinfeld, or no, was it Jon Stewart? It was Jon Stewart or Jerry Seinfeld. Somebody with the initials JS said, a joke's not funny if it's a lie. There has to be a core of truth about humanity, about society, something there. If there's nothing in there that rings true, then it's not funny. And that doesn't mean that the situation is real, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can think of any number of pieces that Weekly Humorist runs, or outlets like McSweeney's, New Yorker Shouts, where it's very far-fetched situation, right? Like it's in the future or it's monsters or something, but they're behaving like humans.
Right.
So there has to be something real about it. So that really is the number one thing. And writing funny in poetry has a lot in common with any other kind of humor writing.
Yeah.
Good writing is good writing. But there are certainly tricks to the trade for comic verse in terms of making your work better rhythmically in terms of rhyme, various structural elements. Word choice is possibly even more important in poetry because you have fewer of them. Each one will better really work.
That's the interesting thing about poetry. I think similar to, I guess, maybe the way people craft jokes on Twitter, the limitations facilitate creativity sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, like with poetry, like this is the formula that you have to follow because of the rules of poetry. And how can you be funny within this template, like these rules? And that's how I think people can be. They sometimes excel because of the restrictions.
I love that you have brought this. This is one of my pet topics, which is creativity within constraints. And I think a lot of people, in fact, probably everybody needs some constraints to write well, and especially to write funny. Think of how paralyzing it is when you have, too much choice, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not the first. There's a psychologist whose name is temporarily escaping me, who has a TED Talk where he talks about the paralysis of the supermarket, where you have 5,000 choices.
Yeah. Way too many choices.
Oh my God, how hard is it to shop for cereal there compared to when you go into your local bodega and there's like Cheerios, Corn Flakes, Rice Krispies, pick one.
Yeah.
And so when you have these constraints that you're pushing against, I feel like it's kind of like squeezing your brain through like toothpaste in a tube, and it's pushing you forward, and it's pushing you away from easy first thoughts towards something more original, more interesting. You start to, you have maybe a serendipitous correspondence that you notice with rhyme. Thinking of potential rhymes, it might spark an idea that's so much more interesting than you would have had if you could have chosen any word in the world.
Yeah.
So sometimes people, I think, assume that if you're writing in meter and rhyme, that you're forced to say bad stuff. You can't say what you really want to say. And I would counter that actually you have a lot more to say, and more interestingly, at least for comic poetry, if you are writing in form. And I don't really limit that to comic poetry. A lot of the poets I admire most writing today who are not comic also write in form, and they're brilliant.
I feel like it's also a really good tip for like anyone writing jokes. If you're writing a joke, whether it's like a monologue joke, you're trying to write monologue jokes, you're trying to write stand-up comedy, write out kind of like when you write your long thing, cut it in half. Can you write this exact same thing, but can you do it in half the amount of words? And now can you shorten it again? And it's like you need to knock off the stuff that isn't absolutely necessary. And that's the stuff that's the joke. Like whatever's left over is what you need, and only have what you need. And that's the most effective way to say that joke, because the longer you spend telling your joke or writing your thing, the more messy it seems.
Yes, and the faster your listener or reader is going to get to the punchline, and they may beat you there, and then the punchline doesn't hit them because they've already guessed it.
Yeah. So it's like I can't remember someone told me this. It was like write your thing and then drop it down a flight of stairs, and what doesn't fall off is what you keep.
Huh. That's how I grade my students' papers too.
You throw them down a flight of stairs?
No, not really. I've been advised to do that.
Okay, Tom Duffy, you got to get up there. Get to the top of the flight of stairs. I'm pushing you down there. And then we're going to see what your grade is. The amount that you bleed will be what your grade is. Don't bleed too much. If you bleed too much, bad grade. So, Melissa, you have to tell me a funny story about walking in on someone.
Okay.
And,
so
I want to hear about this.
All right. So, I think probably it would be better to read you the poem about walking in on people because
read me the poem.
A whole bunch of them at once. But
Okay.
Walking in on people. It's just a talent that I've always had, though not, thank God, around my mom and dad. They did the deed as living proof I knew it, and yet I somehow never saw them do it. The same cannot be said, regrettably, of roommates, colleagues, hosts, and 2 or 3 romantic pairs whose panting thrusts and reaches were glimpsed by me on isolated beaches. Of poets who shared sitting rooms be damned, I witnessed at a conference and jammed. Of friends rebounding from a recent breakup, and once 2 mimes in nothing but their makeup. They goggled up at me with mute surprise, their mouths dramatic O's that matched their eyes. His hands suspended in midair to pet her. Marcel Marceau could not have done it better. Why me? Why all this unintended shock? I wish I knew. I don't forget to knock. I never tiptoe like a ballerina, and still I'm like some peeping Thomasina. My consolation is I get for free a version of what some folks pay to see. Instead of porno actors in flagranti, I'm bound to catch a glimpse of someone's auntie. And though it will humiliate us both, while prompting an unconscionable oath from Uncle Irving, Archibald, or Maury, it's guaranteed to make a better story.
Very good. That sounds like you. It sounds like you've walked in on a lot of sex. That is a lot of sex, Melissa, that you've walked in on.
I know. And you might think, ooh, she's doing it on purpose. I promise you I am not. It is horrifyingly embarrassing when it happens.
It's like you attract people who want to get laid should be near you in your aura because you seem to people get lucky where
oh my
where
God,
you
I
are.
could start a business.
Yeah.
I could get rich off of this. I hadn't thought of that.
Sex aura. I haven't had that many sex walk-in experiences. Only the one unfortunate one when I was a child, and then my freshman college roommate definitely was like much cooler than me, and he was getting laid a lot. So I wouldn't walk in on him as much as he would make me. I wouldn't get to go in the room anymore, and I had to sleep in like the lounge in the dorm room lounge on the second floor of where I freshman year.
Sexiled.
I got sexiled all the time. He was quite the cool guy. I did not get laid. He got laid a lot. And then roommates, I had a really uncomfortable situation where I walked in on my laundromat attendant. I went in to pick up my laundry, and the woman in the back and the guy in the back were doing something that maybe wasn't fully unclothed, but it was definitely something romantic. And I interrupted them in the laundromat doing something in the back room where all the laundry was. And she scurried away, and he pulled up his pants and was like, "Can I help you?" And I was like, "Ugh, yeah, that's my laundry over there. I'm on my laundry."
Those pants you're lying on, could I just...
Can I have my laundry, please? Can you please wash your hands or something? I don't care. Whatever. Just I need my clothes.
Somehow laundry and sex, like you don't really want to have those mixing at your laundry, And
I still go there. Like they're still the closest place.
Well, they're probably very good at getting stains out.
Oh, they are very good at getting stains out. Melissa. Well, that definitely qualified as a Talkward story. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for coming on and talking about the book, The Witch Demands a Retraction, is on sale now. Please buy it for the holidays. Illustrated by Ron Barrett. And you should also buy all of Melissa's other books of poetry, which are delightful. And people can see all of these items at your website. Is it melissabalmain.com?
Yes.
All right. So we'll have all that in the description of this podcast. So please visit her. And is it at your name for Twitter?
Yeah, at Melissa Balmain. Yeah.
And then also Instagram. Are you on Instagram?
I am. Yeah. And I have very boring handles everywhere because I'm really bad at finding people on social media. I don't know about you, but I'm always like, oh, it would really help me if you would just use your name, sir. So.
Absolutely. I just have my name. Everyone else has these weird things that I have to go and find them, and I can't just tag them. I have to be like, oh, what's your name on Instagram? Oh, it's some weird thing that I don't know. It's an inside joke that no one knows anymore because you made it 10 years ago. I don't know. I like boring names on Instagram. It's much easier to find people.
I do too. I'm glad I found you, kindred spirit of boring names. It's
easy. Just my name. And then also, I didn't get to ask you, but are you a former mime?
Yes, I am a recovering mime.
How long were you a mime for?
In college, I was a member of my university's mime company, and
There's a mime company?
There was a mime company. I think it's defunct, which is very sad. It was so much fun.
Well, Melissa, no one spoke up to keep it going.
It was great fun, and it did lead to, this is another cringeworthy story. If you want me to end, sure. I was caught miming without a license in Miami. The summer after I graduated from college, pretty much. I still had all the equipment, my leotard, my white makeup. I thought, hey, I have a free afternoon. I'm going to go to this mall. And
you need to have like a permit to be a outdoor acting person.
I didn't know you needed a permit, and this crowd gathered, and there I am climbing fake staircases and pulling fake ropes and building fake walls. And some mall security comes over and asks me if I forget what the word was, but it was basically, are you licensed to mime, ma'am? And the answer was no. And yeah.
Did you start miming? You're like, here's my license, and you're just kind of opened up a fake wallet and you pulled out your license and you waited for him, and he was like, I don't find this amusing at all.
Yeah, they did not find me a bit amusing. Not one bit.
Miming without a license. Did you get a ticket?
I got an imaginary ticket and I was in jail. Yeah.
That's funny. How big was the crowd?
I'm going to say thousands.
Thousands of people at the mall.
No. It was probably like 20 people, but enough people to like block the escalator,
Did you keep the mime outfit? Do you still have the mime outfit? Do you break it out every now and then?
Oh, just for special occasions with my husband.
I hope nobody walks in on you. Oh.
Oh my God.
All right. We'll wrap it up there. Everybody visit Melissa online, and everyone buy Melissa's book, The Witch Demands a Retraction. Fairy tale reboots for adults, because it's wonderful and you should buy it. And the link will be in the description of this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, Melissa. It was wonderful talking to you today.
Thank you. I had a blast. Thank you, Marty.
All right. Well, have a great holiday season. I'm gonna push this ending music, and then we'll be all done.
Listening to Talkward. Please subscribe, follow us, and visit weeklyhumorist.com.